It was the darkest night of my life when David passed away, leaving me adrift in a sea of grief. I was 8 months pregnant, on the cusp of bringing our son Ethan into a world that had suddenly turned cold and unforgiving. The days that followed were a foggy blur of mourning, but with Ethan's arrival, I found a flicker of hope. I had to be strong for him, even when I felt like I was falling apart. Every morning before dawn, I would rise quietly, careful not to wake Ethan. The kitchen would fill with the comforting scent of fresh-baked sweets, a small reminder of the warmth that once filled our home. I gathered my ingredients and headed to my modest spot on the bustling streets of Houston. My stand was a simple affair, a wooden table draped with colorful cloths, an array of cupcakes, cookies, and chocolates displayed with as much care as I could muster. It wasn't much, but it was our lifeline. 2 cupcakes and a chocolate bar, please, I would say with a smile to each customer, hiding the fatigue that threatened to overwhelm me. Each sale was a small victory, a step toward ensuring Ethan's future. The regulars who visited my stand were my silent supporters, their kind words often the only solace in my tiring days. One of those mornings, as I arranged the sweets with meticulous care, Mr. Lopes shuffled over. He was a familiar face, a kind-hearted older gentleman who always stopped by to check on us. "Morning, Emily. How's the little one doing?" he asked with a warm smile. "He's growing up so fast, Mr. Lopes. Already trying to crawl. I can hardly keep up," I replied, the pride in my voice masking the underlying exhaustion. "He'll be walking before you know it." "You're doing a great job, Emily. I see how hard you work every day," he said, his words a balm to my weary soul. But there were days when even the small comforts couldn't shield me from the harshness of reality. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter, and the small income from my stand barely covered our basic needs. The city, with its towering buildings and indifferent crowds, loomed over me, a constant reminder of the life I had once dreamed of, but now seemed out of reach. One evening, as I was packing up my stand, a young man approached. His gaze swept over the table, a hint of disdain in his eyes. "You sell these here every day?" he asked, skepticism dripping from his words. "Yes, I do. I bake them fresh every morning," I replied, forcing a smile. He scoffed, shaking his head. "Don't you think you should be doing something more with your life? Selling sweets on the street isn't exactly glamorous." His words stung, but I kept my composure. I'd heard such comments before, but it didn't make them any easier to bear. "Maybe it isn't glamorous, but it's honest work. It provides for my son, and that's what matters most," I said, packing the remaining sweets into boxes with deliberate calm. That night, after I put Ethan to bed, I stood over his crib, watching him sleep. His tiny hands clutched the edge of his blanket, his peaceful expression a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. I gently stroked his head and whispered a promise. "I know things are tough right now, Ethan, but I promise you, I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you have a better future. You and me, we're going to make it through this." With a heavy heart, but a renewed determination, I went to bed, preparing myself for another day of hardship. It wouldn't be easy, but for Ethan, I would endure anything. Ethan grew up faster than I ever imagined. Even in his early years, he seemed to sense the weight of our situation, displaying a resilience and maturity that far exceeded his age. It was as if he understood that our lives were a delicate balance, and he wanted to do everything he could to help keep us steady. Every morning before I left for the stand, I would ask him, "Ethan, honey, do you need anything else before I head out?" My hands busied themselves with the routine of packing up the goods for the day, but my eyes would always flicker to him, hoping he wouldn't ask for more than I could give. "No, Mom, I'm okay. I'll just finish my homework before you come back," he would say, his serious eyes betraying the childhood he was too quickly leaving behind. Ethan had managed to secure a scholarship to an elite private school, a beacon of hope in our otherwise challenging circumstances. It was a point of pride for both of us, a testament to his brilliance and hard work. Yet I wanted him to focus solely on his studies, hoping that education would shield him from the harsh realities we faced. Ethan, I'd say gently, I know you want to help with the stand, but your education is really important. Focus on your studies, and I'll handle the rest. He'd look at me with those earnest eyes, his brow furrowing in a way that made him look older than his years. I just want to help, Mom. I see how hard you work, and I feel like I should be doing something too. My heart would twist at his words, a mix of pride and sadness swelling within me. I appreciate that, sweetheart, but your job right now is to learn. I need you to concentrate on your schoolwork so you can have the opportunities I never did. He would nod, though I could see the reluctance in his eyes. Despite my assurances, he always sought ways to support me, to lighten the load in any small way he could. His commitment to his studies was unwavering. No matter how long I worked or how tired I was, Ethan kept his grades up and maintained his scholarship. He rarely complained, though I often worried about the pressure he put on himself. One afternoon, as I was preparing for my afternoon shift at the stand, Ethan came to me with a serious expression. I could tell something was on his mind. Mom, he began hesitantly, I heard a couple of kids at school talking. They think I'm weird because of our situation. They don't get why I'm always the last to leave, and why I don't have the latest gadgets. My heart ached at his words. I had hoped to shield him from the harshness of other people's judgments, but it seemed no amount of love could protect him completely. Kids can be cruel sometimes, I said gently, kneeling to meet his gaze. Just remember that what matters most is who you are, not what you have. I'm proud of you for staying focused and not letting their comments get to you. I know, he sighed, his small shoulders sagging slightly. I just wish it didn't bother me so much. I want to be like the other kids, but sometimes it feels like I don't fit in. I reached out, cupping his face in my hands. I understand, Ethan, but you have something they don't. Strength and character. That's what truly matters. And you have a bright future ahead of you, one that's not defined by material things. He nodded, though I could see the lingering sadness in his eyes. It was a cruel reality that even children weren't immune to the sting of social differences. But despite his struggles, Ethan continued to excel, using his studies as a refuge from the world's harsh judgments. One evening, after a particularly long day, Ethan handed me a small card. It was simple, hand-drawn, with a message that made my heart swell. I made this for you, Mom, he said shyly. I know you're tired, and I wanted to remind you that I'm proud of you. Thank you for everything you do. The card was adorned with hearts and stars, a childish but earnest attempt to lift my spirits. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, and I pulled him into a tight embrace. Thank you, Ethan, I whispered. This means more to me than you know. You're the reason I keep going every day. In those quiet moments, I realized that Ethan's support was not just in words, but in the depth of his understanding. He saw the sacrifices I made, and even as a child, grasped the gravity of our situation. His love and unwavering support were the pillars that held me up, reminding me that no matter how difficult things became, we had each other. Ethan's school life was a stark contrast to the warmth and love we shared at home. Despite his impressive academic achievements, he faced a daily struggle against the social divide that separated him from his wealthy classmates. His modest background made him an easy target for ridicule in a place where status was measured by the latest gadgets and designer clothes. The school itself was a sprawling institution, with glossy facilities and the latest technology. The halls echoed with the sounds of laughter and chatter, but for Ethan, they often felt more like a battlefield. His old phone and outdated tablet marked him as different, and his peers were quick to notice and judge. One afternoon, as he was walking down the hallway, he overheard two of the more prominent bullies in his class, Daniel and Matthew. They were the ringleaders of a group that thrived on making others feel small. Hey, look at Ethan's phone. Is that a relic from the Stone Age? Daniel snickered, holding up his own state-of-the-art device for comparison. Matthew chimed in. And check out that tablet. It's so old, it probably has a dial-up connection. Ethan felt the familiar sting of their words, but he kept his head down, focusing on getting to his next class. He had grown accustomed to their taunts, but that didn't make them any less painful. In the classroom, things weren't much better. During a group project, Ethan was unfortunately paired with Daniel and Matthew. They took every opportunity to belittle him. "Ethan, you're supposed to contribute ideas, not just sit there," Matthew sneered. "Oh wait, you don't even have any new ones, do you?" Daniel added with a smirk. "Yeah, we get it. Your family sells sweets on the streets. Maybe you should just stick to that instead of trying to keep up with us." Ethan clenched his fists under the desk, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he was smart and capable, but the constant jabs chipped away at his confidence. He chose to stay silent, focusing on the project rather than giving them the satisfaction of seeing him upset. "Just keep your head down, Ethan. Focus on the work. It'll be over soon," he told himself, repeating the mantra in his mind like a shield against their cruelty. Lunchtime was no different. While others gathered in groups, laughing and sharing stories, Ethan often found solace in a quiet corner of the cafeteria. He would unpack his lunch, a simple meal that was a world apart from the gourmet options his classmates enjoyed. Daniel and Matthew made a point of passing by his table, their remarks loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look at that lunch. It's so plain. I bet it's all he can afford," Daniel said with mock pity. Matthew laughed. "Poor Ethan, always on the outside looking in. Maybe he should just accept that he doesn't belong here." Ethan's heart ached, but he refused to let their words bring him down. He focused on his meal and the book he had brought along, immersing himself in a world where he wasn't the outsider. Despite the taunts, he managed to find small pockets of peace in his studies and the support of a few understanding teachers. Later that week, Ethan's English teacher, Ms. Roberts, noticed his unusually quiet demeanor. She was one of the few adults in the school who saw beyond the surface, who understood that not every student fit the same mold. "Ethan," she said after class, her voice gentle, "I've noticed you seem a bit down lately. Is everything okay?" He hesitated, his instinct to hide his struggles kicking in. "I'm fine, Ms. Roberts, just a lot of work to do." She gave him a knowing look, not pressing further but leaving the door open. "If you ever need to talk, my door is always open. Sometimes sharing what's on your mind can make a big difference." He appreciated her concern, but chose to keep his struggles to himself. The last thing he wanted was to add to his mother's worries or to give the bullies more ammunition. Despite the hardships at school, Ethan's determination remained unshaken. He poured himself into his studies, using them as an escape from the cruelty he faced daily. The social divide was a constant reminder of the world he and his mother were up against, but it also fueled his resolve to rise above the negativity and prove that he was more than their judgments. The relentless taunting from Daniel and Matthew escalated with each passing week. It seemed they had appointed themselves as Ethan's personal tormentors, taking every opportunity to remind him of his place in the school's social hierarchy. Despite his academic successes, the gap between Ethan and his classmates only widened, leading to confrontations that tested his resolve daily. One afternoon, during gym class, the students were playing basketball. Ethan joined a pickup game with a mix of classmates, including Daniel and Matthew. They seized this opportunity to make him feel even more out of place. "Nice shot, Ethan," Daniel called out mockingly after Ethan scored a basket. "Did you learn to shoot hoops on the streets? Maybe that's where you're really meant to be." Matthew chimed in with a smirk. "Yeah, I bet you've got a whole routine of selling sweets while dodging basketballs. Too bad you can't just stick to one thing." Ethan's face flushed with anger, but he focused on the game, refusing to let their words break his concentration. He played with determination, channeling his frustration into every move, every shot. Despite their constant jabs, he was determined to show them he wasn't as fragile as they thought. The next confrontation came during a group project in history class. Ethan found himself paired with Daniel and Matthew once again. This time, their taunts were more personal, aimed at belittling his background and making him feel out of place. "So, Ethan," Matthew sneered, "are you going to lecture us on the history of selling sweets?" "Not exactly a topic for our group, is it?" Daniel added with a smirk. "Maybe you should go back to doing what you're good at, Ethan. After all, history doesn't need a dropout from the streets." Ethan had endured enough. He had tried to ignore them for so long, but their constant attacks had pushed him to his limit. With a controlled but firm voice, he decided to stand up for himself. "I'm here to do my part on this project, just like everyone else. If you have a problem with that, maybe you should find another group," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning inside him. Daniel and Matthew exchanged smug glances, clearly enjoying the tension they were creating. Daniel leaned in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, look at that. Ethan's finally speaking up. How brave. Too bad bravery doesn't change your background." Ethan felt a surge of frustration, but remained composed. He turned his attention back to the project, refusing to let them get under his skin. His response was a mixture of determination and restraint, showing them that he wasn't going to be dragged into their games. Later that week, during lunch, Ethan found a quiet spot in the cafeteria to eat alone. He had come to cherish these moments of solitude, away from the prying eyes and judgmental whispers. But that day, as he unpacked his lunch, he was approached by Sarah, a classmate who had often observed the interactions between him and his tormentors. "Hey, Ethan," she said softly, sitting down across from him. "I saw what happened in history class. I just wanted to say I think you handled it really well." Ethan looked up, surprised by her kindness. "Thanks, Sarah. It's not easy, but I'm trying to stay focused on what really matters." "I know it's tough," she said, her voice filled with empathy. "If you ever want to talk or need a friend, just let me know. Not everyone thinks like Daniel and Matthew." He appreciated her offer, though he was still wary of opening up. He valued her support but felt it was important to handle his problems as best he could. Nevertheless, her offer of friendship was a small comfort in the midst of his struggles. The confrontations with Daniel and Matthew continued to challenge Ethan, but each encounter also reinforced his determination to prove his worth through his actions, not his social status. He knew that his journey was about more than enduring their mockery. It was about rising above it and achieving success despite the obstacles. And with every step, he was growing stronger, more resolute in his mission to carve out a better future for himself and his mother. The emotional weight of Ethan's situation grew heavier with each passing day. The constant bullying from Daniel and Matthew had begun to seep into his personal life, creating a storm of internal conflict. He found himself trapped between the urge to confide in his mother and his overwhelming desire to shield her from any additional worry. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at school, Ethan returned to the small apartment he shared with his mother. The streets outside were quieter than usual, the flickering streetlights casting long shadows that mirrored the darkness he felt within. As he climbed the stairs, each step felt like a climb against the gravity of his growing burdens. Emily was already home, setting the table for dinner. The kitchen was filled with the comforting aroma of a simple meal, a testament to her tireless efforts to create some semblance of normalcy amidst their struggles. She greeted Ethan with a warm smile, though her eyes reflected a mixture of weariness and hope. "How was school today, honey?" she asked, her voice gentle and probing. Ethan hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor as he slipped off his shoes. He wanted to be honest, to pour out all the frustration and pain he carried. But as he looked at his mother, at the tired lines on her face and the determined glint in her eyes, he knew he couldn't add to her worries. It was all right. "Just another day," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Emily noticed the weariness in his tone, the way he avoided her gaze. She set the table with a touch more care than usual, sensing that something was amiss. "You don't have to keep everything to yourself, Ethan. If something's bothering you, you can always talk to me," she offered, her voice laced with concern. He nodded, but the walls he had built around his emotions felt impenetrable. He didn't want to worry her, didn't want her to know just how cruel the world could be. "I know, Mom. It's just, sometimes it feels like things are harder than they should be," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily walked over and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Her touch was a grounding force, a reminder that he wasn't alone. "I understand," she said softly. "I wish I could make things easier for you, but remember, no matter how tough things get, we're in this together. I'm here for you, always." Ethan looked up at her, meeting her gaze. There was a sincerity in her eyes that gave him a sliver of comfort, even if it didn't alleviate the heaviness in his chest. He managed a small smile, appreciating her support, but still wrestling with the turmoil inside him. Later that week, Ethan found himself alone in his room, the silence pressing in around him. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring blankly at the wall. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions: anger, sadness, frustration. He picked up his old, worn tablet, a gift from his mother from years ago. The screen flickered to life, revealing a message from Sarah. "Sarah, hey, Ethan. I noticed you've been a bit off lately. Everything okay?" He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He wanted to tell her everything, to let someone else carry a piece of his burden. But instead, he typed back a more guarded response. "Ethan, it's been rough. The teasing at school, the pressure to keep up, it all adds up. I just don't want to drag my mom into this. She's got enough to handle." Her reply was quick and supportive. "Sarah, I get it, but you don't have to go through this alone. You're a great person, and you deserve to be treated with respect. If you need to talk or just hang out, I'm here." Ethan felt a small wave of relief wash over him. It was a reminder that there were people who cared, even if they couldn't fix everything. He wasn't as alone as he sometimes felt. That night, as he lay in bed, Ethan stared at the ceiling, the weight of his emotions pressing down on him. He felt trapped between the need to protect his mother from his own struggles and the desire to find some way to cope with the pain. The constant bullying, the feeling of not fitting in, it all gnawed at him, threatening to consume his spirit. But as he closed his eyes, he thought of his mother's words, of her unwavering support and love. She had faced so much, endured so many hardships, yet she never faltered. She was his anchor, and he knew that he had to keep going, not just for himself, but for her as well. No matter how difficult things got, he would find a way to rise above it. The struggle was part of his journey, and he was determined to face it with the same strength and courage he admired in her. The morning was crisp and clear as Emily set up her stall on the corner of 5th and Main. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow on the quiet streets of Houston. Emily arranged the sweets with practiced precision, her hands moving deftly despite the weariness that clung to her like a shadow. This stall was more than a means of survival. It was a symbol of her determination to provide for Ethan, a beacon of hope amidst the challenges they faced. As she was putting the finishing touches on her setup, she noticed 2 figures approaching. Daniel and Matthew, the very names that had been whispered with disdain in Ethan's stories, now stood before her stall. Emily's heart sank as they walked up with an air of casual arrogance, their eyes scanning her table with a mix of curiosity and condescension. "Hey, look at this," Daniel sneered, his voice carrying a mocking lilt. "Freshly baked sweets from the street vendor." Matthew chimed in, "Wow, must be tough, huh? Selling candy and cakes to make ends meet. That's real charming." Emily's heart tightened at their tone. She had encountered rude customers before, but these boys carried an edge that unsettled her. She forced a polite smile, hoping to diffuse the situation with kindness. "Good morning," she said, keeping her voice even. "If you'd like to try something, feel free to take a look. Everything's made with love." Daniel's lip curled in a sneer. "Love, huh? Sounds like a nice story. but I'm not sure how many people want to buy sweets from someone like you." "Yeah," Matthew added with a smirk. "Isn't it a bit below you? Maybe you should stick to other ways of making money. It's not like you're attracting the right crowd." Emily felt a wave of heat rush through her, a mix of anger and sadness. These boys, so young and already so hardened by their own privilege, had no idea what it took to survive in a world that wasn't handed to you on a silver platter. She held her ground, her voice steady. "I'm just trying to provide for my son," she said calmly. "Everyone has their own way of making a living." Daniel's eyes glinted with a mix of contempt and amusement. "Yeah, I guess. Just make sure you don't expect too much sympathy from people like us. We've got better things to worry about." With that, they turned and walked away, their laughter echoing down the street. Emily stood there, the sting of their words lingering in the air. She took a deep breath, trying to shake off the negativity that clung to her like a heavy cloak. She had faced worse, but something about this encounter made her feel more vulnerable than usual. Later that evening, after a long day of work, Emily returned home to find Ethan at the kitchen table, diligently working on his homework. The sight of him brought a small smile to her face, but the encounter with Daniel and Matthew still gnawed at her. "Hi, Ethan," she greeted, setting down her bag. "How was your day?" He looked up, immediately sensing the tension in her expression. "Hey, Mom, you look a bit off. Everything okay?" Emily forced a smile, not wanting to burden him with her own troubles. "Just had a rough day. Some people can be pretty rude sometimes, but it's nothing I can't handle." Ethan's eyes narrowed with concern. He had been trying to shield his mother from his own struggles at school, but seeing that she had faced similar issues made his heart ache. "Did something happen?" he asked gently. "You don't have to hide it from me, you know." She sighed, sitting down beside him. It wasn't fair to keep things from him, especially when they both knew that life was far from perfect. "I had a run-in with a couple of boys today," she admitted. "They were really disrespectful and made some hurtful comments. I didn't want to let it get to me, but it's hard to ignore sometimes." Ethan's face tightened with a mix of anger and sadness. He knew who those boys were, and the thought that they had targeted his mother made his blood boil. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I wish people could see how hard you work and how much you care." Emily reached out and patted his hand, her eyes reflecting a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. "Thank you, Ethan. I just want you to focus on your studies and not worry about these things. It's my job to handle the tough stuff." Ethan nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. He wanted to protect her, to shield her from the harshness of the world, even if he couldn't always do so. The encounter with Daniel and Matthew had only strengthened his resolve to succeed and make their lives better. As the evening wore on, they returned to their routines, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Emily's resolve to keep pushing forward remained unshaken, even in the face of adversity. And for Ethan, the vow to support his mother became a driving force, fueling his dedication to his studies and his unwavering pursuit of a better life. The day of Ethan's graduation dawned with a soft, warm glow, promising a mix of pride and bittersweet emotions. The grand auditorium of his elite private school was already buzzing with excitement, the air thick with the scent of fresh flowers and the anticipation of new beginnings. Families and friends gathered to celebrate, their voices mingling in a harmonious cacophony that echoed through the hallways. Emily arrived early, dressed in her best, a simple but elegant navy blue dress she had saved up for months to buy. Her nerves were a tangle of excitement and anxiety. Today was not just a celebration of Ethan's achievements, but also a culmination of their shared journey. Despite the challenges they had faced, this moment was a testament to their resilience and unbreakable bond. "This is it, Ethan," Emily said, her voice trembling with emotion as they stood together in the corridor. "I can hardly believe how fast the time has flown." Ethan looked at his mother with a mixture of gratitude and love. The graduation cap and gown he wore felt heavy, but it was a weight he bore with pride. Over the years, he had reflected on the sacrifices she had made, the long hours she had worked to ensure he had a chance at a better future. "I know, Mom," he replied softly. "I couldn't have done this without you. I'm really grateful for everything you've done for me." Emily beamed, her eyes misting over. She knew how much this day meant to both of them. And it was a milestone they had reached together. For a moment, the fears and anxieties that had plagued her seemed to melt away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of pride. As the ceremony began, the auditorium filled with the sounds of classical music and the soft rustling of programs. Ethan sat among his classmates, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation. He glanced at his mother in the crowd, noting the way she held herself with quiet dignity, even as her eyes shimmered with tears of joy. When it was time for Ethan to walk across the stage, Emily stood, her heart swelling with pride. She watched as he moved with a grace and confidence that belied the struggles he had faced. His name was called, and he strode across the stage to receive his diploma. The applause that followed was thunderous, a celebration of his hard work and perseverance. Yet, as Ethan looked out into the audience, his eyes caught the familiar sneers of Daniel and Matthew, seated near the front row. He had hoped to get through this day without incident, but their presence was a stark reminder of the challenges he had overcome. Ethan took a deep breath, his hands tightening around the diploma. This was his moment, and he wasn't going to let them ruin it. When it was his turn to give a speech, Ethan walked up to the podium. He had prepared a standard speech, filled with the usual graduation cliches, but as he stood there, looking out at the sea of faces, he knew he needed to say something more. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice steady. "As we come to the end of our journey here, I want to take a moment to speak about something very close to my heart." He paused, gathering his thoughts. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on him. He glanced at his mother, who was watching with a mixture of anticipation and love. "I want to talk about my mother, Emily," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "She's the reason I stand here today. For years, she's worked tirelessly to provide for me, even when things were incredibly tough. She's faced adversity with a strength and grace that I can only aspire to." A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. Ethan's words were a sharp deviation from the typical graduation rhetoric, capturing the audience's full attention. "My mother sells sweets on the streets of Houston to support us," he said, his voice unwavering. "She's faced mockery and hardship, but she never let it affect her resolve. She taught me the value of hard work, resilience, and most importantly, love." He looked at his mother, who was now openly weeping, her tears a mixture of pride and emotion. The audience watched, enraptured by the sincerity and emotion in his voice. "I want to thank her publicly for everything she's done," Ethan said, his voice breaking slightly. "Her sacrifices are the foundation of my success, and I'm incredibly proud of the person she is. She's my role model, and she's made me who I am today." The room erupted in applause, a standing ovation that resonated with the truth and power of his words. Emily, despite her earlier apprehensions, felt a profound sense of validation and pride. The mocking presence of Daniel and Matthew faded into insignificance compared to the love and respect Ethan had so openly displayed. As Ethan stepped down from the podium and returned to his seat, he caught sight of Daniel and Matthew's faces. Their expressions had shifted from amusement to discomfort, the impact of Ethan's words leaving them visibly shaken. Ethan's confidence and sincerity had turned what could have been a moment of humiliation into a powerful testament to the strength and unity of his family. After the ceremony, as families gathered to celebrate, Ethan made his way to his mother, who was surrounded by well-wishers offering their congratulations. "Mom," he said softly, embracing her, "I hope you know how much you mean to me. Today was just as much about you as it was about me." Emily held him tightly, her heart overflowing with love and pride. "Thank you, Ethan," she whispered. "You've made this day unforgettable. I'm so proud of you." The graduation ceremony, despite its earlier tensions, ended on a high note. Ethan had used his platform to honor his mother and their journey, and the audience's reaction was a testament to the profound impact of his heartfelt tribute. The day marked not only Ethan's academic achievements, but also the deep bond and mutual respect between mother and son, a bond that would carry them forward into the future with hope and determination.